Welcome everyone to Coach Unboxed. This is a project by Unboxed Sports, an agency elevating professional tour tennis coaches on and off the court. I'm Yannick Yoshizawa and joined by Nicole Pratt, a former Australian number one, two-time Olympian, winner of 9 WTA titles, and also the Junior Australian Open, her homeland. She's now a tour coach and has taken on influential leadership roles of Tennis Australia and the Women's Tennis Association, advocating for female athletes and coaches in her country and globally. Welcome, Nicole. Great seeing you. How's everything going? You're in London, right?
I am in London. As you can see, we've got a backdrop of a hotel room, and I'm very happy with my stay. This time, I'm actually in Wimbledon,
Oh,
and it's a very different Wimbledon because the Christmas lights are out. It doesn't get light until about 8 a.m., and then it's dark at 4 p.m. So I've been over here for 4 days helping with a WTA coach inclusion program. I've been
very
working
cool.
with four up and coming British female coaches.
Awesome. And out of curiosity, I'm sure some people have that thought in mind. How are the grass courts in the winter?
Well, no one's playing on them. Everyone's indoors. It's too cold.
Okay, so they're all covered. No one can even touch the grass right now.
No, no.
That's awesome. And then you just finished also Billie Jean Cup, right? Now after London, you're just back home doing some off season, getting ready for the home slam. Is that right?
Yeah, it's been a crazy 2 months, I have to say. I was in Asia for the last sort of swing there for a couple of tournaments, and then I ended up flying to Riyadh for the WTA finals, and then I flew back to Australia, and actually turned around 5 days later, flew to the Billie Jean King Cup in Malaga, Spain, flew back. I was home for 10 days. And now I'm in London 5 days back home. And yeah, and as soon as I arrive, I've got three players back on deck, on court, to yeah, get some work done before the summer starts, which is only like 3 weeks away, which is kind of scary.
I know that is crazy, and I don't even know what's your time zone that you're at now, but what's the time zone in your head? You're probably sleeping God knows what time, but
Yeah, it's literally wake up. What have I got to do? Uh, be awake, being engaged as much as I can, and try and get as much sleep as possible. So, yeah,
awesome.
I've got a good 24-hour flight home back to Melbourne, and hopefully get some sleep on the way back.
Cool. Well, look, I have a lot of papers of your career here. So, but before we get to all your accomplishments, I would love to for you to share a little bit of your background. Really, how did Nicole Pratt get into tennis from really early childhood? How did that sport became, I would say, one of your passions now?
Yeah, the whole family played. I grew up an hour outside of Mackay, Queensland, and Mackay is not a huge city, and the town that I was from was literally 20 people, and seven of those people were actually my family. So grew up on a sugarcane farm. My dad bulldozed a court right beside the house, and he literally hammer and nails put together a practice wall. That's pretty much how I learned to play. Every afternoon I'd run down and play, 20, 30 minutes on the wall and pretend I was playing. And at that time, my idols were Martina Navratilova and Chris Evert and Steffi Graf. So I used to pretend I was playing against them. I just, I went up and down the coast playing junior tournaments, and I did pretty well. And then at 15 years of age, I got a scholarship to the Australian Institute of Sport. And I guess my whole life changed then and there when I hopped on the plane. My parents dropped me off and said, Nicole, from here on end, it's up to you. Anything you do is now your responsibility, and here you are. So yeah,
Wow.
I had a good junior career, and transitioned sort of in the pros kind of late actually. It took me a while to go from juniors to being ranked in the top 100 in the world. I won the Australian Open Juniors, and it wasn't until sort of 24 that I broke into the top 100. So it took me a while to find the right environment
Yeah.
uh, for me. Yeah.
And well, you said your family was big into tennis, and it's hard to say the golden era of Australia because you guys have had so many good years of tennis. I actually found this stats. Australia is the second country with the most Grand Slams total, just after the United States, which is huge. Even though Australia is a big country, the population is not that big. So you grew up of very successful tennis players. Was that part of that inspiration of yours? You're looking at this Australian player and say, well, they made it, I can also make it. So you also had that belief in yourself from the very young age, like, I want to be pro. Was that a very realistic dream for you at that point?
For me personally, no. I actually didn't think that from where I came from, like a small country town, I wasn't thinking it was really possible. But yeah, as you came across more and more of the tennis community, and because I was a good junior, I started to learn the history of the game. And when you hear stories about, Rocket Rod Laver coming from Rockhampton, which was only 400 kilometers away from Mackay, you're kind of like, okay, well, he obviously found a way. But yeah, for me, there were so many great players from Queensland, actually. Roy Emerson was from Queensland, Rocket Rod. And then in the female space, in the women's game, there were Margaret Court. Like, she was a great of the game. Leslie Bowery won the French Open. And then the generations before, well, ahead of me, let's say, were kind of like Liz Smiley, Nicole Bradkey,
Yeah.
and all that had won Grand Slams, and, well, in doubles at least. And I'll never forget, like, such a iconic moment for me was when Pat Cash won
Mm.
Wimbledon. That was closer to kind of my era of
Uh-huh.
looking up to someone and seeing
Yeah.
someone win a Grand Slam. So yes, we have a strong history of Grand Slam winners, but even more so than that, I feel like it was always instilled from a very young age representing Australia.
Mm.
Whether that be the Davis Cup or the Fed Cup at that
Yeah.
time, this instilled early on, team and national pride.
Yeah. And before we get into a little bit of your transition into the pros, I want to touch on this because, here in probably Mackay, Winnipeg, it's probably the smallest cities I've ever heard someone coming from. But a lot of times people think, wow, you need to have the resources. It's such an expensive sport. But here you are growing up on a dirt court with a wall literally hammered down by your father. You made your own pathway in a way, right? Until you got your scholarship. But it wasn't like you were training on this super expensive training camp and academy. How was that experience, if you can share?
Yeah, it's probably formed so much of my belief system today, which is I do truly believe that anything is possible, that there are no excuses. Because if you want something badly enough, you'll find a way. And I found a way to still get enough volume, but not in a traditional sense. Like, I didn't, I had a half an hour coaching on a Wednesday afternoon from the coach that traveled out from Mackay. My dad and a friend of mine, we used to go into Mackay and do an hour and a half squad on a Thursday. And then we would play competition on Saturday, Sunday, where you play kind of the juniors and then also the senior
Mm-hmm.
competition. That was it. So
Yeah.
I knew that I needed to do more, play more, and it's where the wall came into play. Like, the amount of balls that you could hit in half an hour on a wall, you can't beat the wall. Like,
Yeah.
that's your toughest opponent. So yeah, because I was from the country as well, I played a lot of different sports. And it
Mm-hmm.
wasn't by design, it was more that that's just what we did. We would
Yeah.
play, I mean, for people from different parts of the world listening into this, we played cricket.
Yeah.
And, cricket is very much hand-eye coordination, a lot of running around and catching. So that was what I did a lot of. And then you had your different athletics that you did within school. So, yeah, it was from the country, but sport was huge. Everyone participated in sport. And I think that's where probably I learnt a lot of the skills,
Yeah.
physically, that I needed as well.
That cross training is definitely, because I think sometimes people have this mindset, it's the earlier that you start the better, and then you start putting someone, and I'm sure also that helped you not to burn out of tennis so quickly because you were playing different sports, right? You do have a very successful junior career. You win the Australian Open junior, so at that point I'm sure you're like, okay, I win a Grand Slam. as a junior. Now the next step is to go into professional. How was that transition into, you mentioned it was not the quickest per se. At the same time, was that, were you doubting yourself? You win a junior grand slam and not, let's say, having the same success on the tours as quickly as maybe you thought. Was that coming to your doubt, is like, well, maybe I'm not as good as I was? What was your thought process then?
Well, it's very challenging coming from Australia, as in, especially after juniors, when we went overseas, like we were living out of a suitcase for 6 to 8 months because you ultimately couldn't afford to go back and
Yeah.
forth like a lot of players do today. So you're constantly playing, but you're not really developing your game. And so I think I really sort of struggled continuing to develop during that time. And I guess, I don't know whether it's a funny story, but it's a unique story. I won the Australian Open Juniors with a two-handed backhand.
Okay.
And a year to 18 months after that, I changed to a single-handed backhand. And
Why?
like I don't think there's too many stories like that one. That's probably why it took me longer. I just felt like I couldn't crack an egg with
Yeah.
my two-handed backhand. I it was, I pushed the ball and I had a good lob, but I just didn't feel free. I had a very good slice backhand though, like a one-handed slice backhand.
Hmm.
And then one day I was literally playing a pro circuit event in Australia and I was kind of struggling at that time. I'd sort of got to, during juniors, I got to about 180 in the world, but I wasn't really moving. And one day I just started hitting some one-handed backhands out on court with a buddy of mine from South Africa. And she goes, "Hey, that looks really good." And I'm like, "Oh, it feels really good." And then literally that day I decided to change to a one-handed backhand and everyone thought I was absolutely crazy. And I had some Australian coaches at different times. Well, one of the head coaches actually, and they just said, like, "Nicole, your one hand backhand's terrible." I was like, "I've just changed, so help me get it better."
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, I think I found a way to start
Yeah.
hitting a better one-handed backhand.
So after these years that you actually settle into not only top 100, top 50, reaching 35 in the world in singles, and then also 18 in doubles, how was that conciliation of playing singles and doubles? Because you do see some players having the ability to do that, but it's not easy. Was that something that it was just natural for you, that you like to play both, and you just became successful, or was that something more financially that you wanted to do? What was that choice for you, and how did you handle for so many years?
Well, that probably was born out of some fabulous advice that I got from a coach. And he basically said, "You know what, Nicole? Doubles will pay your bills and singles will put money in the bank." And so pretty much I played doubles every single week and singles because that was instilled in me. And it obviously registered and clicked to go, I've got a great skills. My feel and my reactions was some of my greatest strengths as a player. So I naturally, doubles came quite easy to me.
Hmm.
And, obviously coming from Australia again, if you talk about culture, doubles was such an important part of our culture. And that's just something I always did. You asked the question, what was it? Well, yeah, part of it was financially. It was, if I can sort of make this money and use it to pay my bills or expenses to be actually out on the road, then singles becomes, where I can say, bank, I'll take it.
Yeah, and you have a very successful career, let's say, as an individual from singles, but also playing doubles. You also do compete quite a bit as a team. You competed twice in the Sydney Olympics, as the Athens Olympics. You competed for almost 10 years on the Fed Cup back then, now the Billie Jean Cup. How did it feel playing on the tour and playing these team events? Was it sort of the same for you, or because you mentioned in the beginning you had such a pride in being Australian, play for Australia, was that a little different? And maybe do you wish that there were more team events?
Yeah, I listen, they're my greatest memories. Representing Australia is my greatest memories. because of my teammates, because of, that fact of coming together, and, you felt like you're taking on the rest of the world as a small country. We were a small country, as our population's not as large as other countries. So yeah, that was always a big goal of mine, to wear the green and gold. And it's something that I, never took for granted. Wore my heart on my sleeve whenever I played, for the country. So yeah, that was a big goal of mine, and it's something probably I'm most proud about in my career, representing
Right.
Australia more so than what I did as an individual.
And it seems that maybe this comes from you playing so many sports and installing this, I'm gonna call entrepreneur side of yours. Also, during your time on the tour, you go to win, the WTA Player Service Award in '99, in 2000, 2004. Was that something that you had in the back of your mind of like, I want to do more than just play on the tour? I want to be more, I want to impact in different ways? Or is that was something natural for you that you were at these events and you were helping out? One, first explain what the Player Service Award meant and how did that feel for you, especially because we're going to get into how you have taken so many leadership roles now in your career.
Yeah, well, basically within the structure of the WTA Tour at that time, there was a Players' Council. And so there were 8 representatives on the Players' Council. And, that's what I was doing. I was on the Players' Council for 9, 10 years. And I felt like it was really important that you take ownership as a player, that this is your environment, this is your livelihood, this is where you're spending week in, week out. And at the end of the day, like, change can't happen unless people have a voice. And the council was an opportunity as a player to represent other players as well with a voice. And I really felt like the tour did a great job listening to the players, making different adjustments where they could, like, different rules changes, as well as a lot of conversations about safeguarding players out on tour, uh, trying to increase the pension plan and the benefits to players. So yeah, I was very, very active during that time, and I did take it seriously. And again, it probably comes back to, for me, valuing who had come before me. And it was a sense of, well, I need to also give back,
Yeah.
because, when Billie Jean King first formed the WTA Tour, uh, she wasn't in essence doing it for herself. She was actually doing it
Yeah.
for the next generation. And I certainly felt a responsibility to do that, and still to this day
Yeah.
feel that responsibility as well.
Yeah. And you're still doing something about it, which is amazing. And you spent, if I'm not mistaken, 19 years on the tour. As you start to come to the end of your career, was that something that you were feeling like, okay, this is my last couple of years on tour, this is my last year on tour? Did you start thinking, what do I do next?
Yeah, for me, like, I get this question a lot, like, how was the transition out of playing and then moving into something else? And for me, I was very fortunate to have fantastic advice, good mentors around me that were honest and said, listen, Nicole, you've only got 2, 3 years probably left to play. So what is it that you want to do after playing? And that's where, even when I was playing, I got into commentary. I was doing commentary on the side, particularly at the Australian
While you were
Open,
playing?
while I was playing. Yeah. Yeah. So that was sort of an avenue that, one of my greatest strengths was probably tennis IQ, tennis
Mm-hmm.
smarts, and
Yeah.
to be able to bring that to the commentary box and articulate it. I loved it. I loved it. I loved every
I'm
minute
sure
of it.
you
And
were also analyzing your possible opponents as well.
correct, correct. Yeah, so I was doing that, and probably always, like, even through my 19 years of playing, I always knew I wanted to be a coach afterwards. I just loved the game. I was that player that was quite happy to spend 12 hours at the courts and loved every single minute of it. I'd go watch matches, I'd talk to other players, I'd talk to coaches. That was probably before phones and social media. That's what we used to do back in the day. We'd all sit around the table and we'd talk, and we'd get to know each other and support each other, and talk tennis. So it was a great time.
Yeah, and so part of your transition in 2008, you also become a member of the WTA board of directors. What were your intentions? Did you have a goal in mind of being part of this? Like, okay, there are three things that I want to evolve within the tour. And were you already also working with Tennis Australia?
Yeah, it was a tricky time, I'll be honest. I was juggling. I was juggling being on the board as a director. The tour had also asked me, just sort of in weaving in and around that. It was the new circuit structure. It was 2008. So the tour asked me to go to tournaments and deliver to the players and educate the players um, on the new structure of the tour in 2008. So I ended up in Miami, Rome, Charleston, Berlin, and Roland Garros for the tour. But
Mm.
equally, that was the year that when I stopped playing, I also wanted to take a year off. And then in March, pretty much Casey Delacqua was there and she was there with a fitness trainer. And the fitness trainer sort of said to me, "Oh, Nicole, you're here at this event and you're going to be in Charleston next week. How about, do you want to help Casey?" And Casey was someone I'd played with, played against. She was in the BJK Cup team. And I was like, I knew I wanted to be a coach. I just probably didn't know that I wanted to do it so soon. Yeah, so that kind of happened. And then, it went really well with Casey. She had great success. And then literally, yep, I'm coaching, I'm commentating, I'm on the WTA board, and I'm doing a little bit of this. I managed to kind of do it all. Probably in hindsight, I probably was doing a little bit too much, but I guess that's probably the nature of myself. I get myself in trouble sometimes trying to do so many things.
And you mentioned you had that concept of being a coach post your career. Was that something that you also got influenced by your coaches when you were a player, or were there other coaches that also you look like this coach has made such a big difference in my life? I also want to be able to make a difference in another player's life. Were there people that you looked up to, or your reference, or your mentors?
I admired my coaches. I love them. I just think, they gave so much of themselves to enable me to live my dream and to achieve what I achieved. And I always just admired that. And I just thought, you know what, if I could somehow be that to someone else and someone else think of me in the way that I thought of others, wow, that's a great way to live your life. Helping others achieve their dreams. And it was also the connection and the relationships that I had with those coaches. They were more than coaches. They were mentors. They were, supporters in the good times and the bad times. And so many of them are my lifelong friends
Yeah.
now. I still keep in contact pretty much with all my coaches. And actually, when I get back to Australia, 2 days from now, I'm actually going to a fundraiser for one of the most influential coaches that I had, Ken Richardson, who'd suffered from, cancer. So I'm going there to a
Yeah.
charity to raise money. So I'm really looking forward to seeing him there.
If you go back to a lot of the players that you've coached now, you started with Casey, you work with Alicia Molek, Nova, Ash Barty, Storm Sanders, and the list goes on. When you hear all these names and now you're probably thinking also the impact that you've made in all those players. What are things that comes to your mind? Is it pride? Is it I achieved great things? Is it actually a sense of bigger responsibility of like, okay, I've been part of their lives. I want to also help, and I'm sure they also made an impact on your life. But what are the things that come to your head today, looking back to all these players who you've coached?
Oh, I think it was a privilege to coach those players, those individuals. They were all so very, very different. Very different. It was exciting because they're different. It's every player was a different challenge. I would like to think with all the players that I've worked with, I've helped instill. I mean, they're all Australian players, right? That sense of pride for country, playing for country. There's so few people that get the opportunity to do that in Australia in tennis. It's an honour. So I felt like I certainly have instilled that within those players. I'd like to think that I also helped them to do more than what they thought was possible, to be honest. I think I'm a very optimistic person and positive. Instilling that in players, I think is really, really important. And probably in some ways those names when you read out, I kind of wish sometimes I was better, like I was a better version for them, especially when I was a younger coach. I definitely think I'm a different coach now in a lot of good ways. And I guess I have a lot of pride in the sense that I'm still great friends with all of
Yeah.
them. And so that important piece that I was just talking about, where coaches were that for me, I feel like I have that with a lot of those players.
Yeah, and before I forget, also I didn't mention, Dasha, and then you've been working with Kim Birrell now, and you have been part of Tennis Australia, but Tennis Australia in general, not just the organization. And you've seen all these names that I read and how they've become so great in what they've achieved. But I also want to talk a little bit more the bigger picture, which I think you have taken from a leadership role during the Tennis Australia. We have seen 45% increase in the number of female coaches and also the highest number of top 250 WTA players the past 40 years. Was that something that you were like, that's what I want to do? I want to have more female coaches. I want to have more players on the 250 making a living off tennis. Or was that something just installing part of your coaching all these players and creating this relationship with more coaches that it was just sort of a consequence to it?
Yeah, I think it was an evolution. I think it started with the players that I was working with having success, and there was a system behind them having success, or a framework, and identifying priorities and what would make the difference. And I think through the success of certain individuals, then I started to think, well, I want to do this more at scale. If I can try and have more of an influence and more of an impact on as many players as I can, I think that'd be a really great thing. But then I also realized in order to have that type of impact at scale, you have to do it through coaches. You have to spend time with coaches and influence coaches, support them and challenge their thinking and develop more coaches. And so as soon as you have coaches aligned to a goal that you want to achieve, then all of a sudden, one coach is influencing 4 or 5 players and the next coach 4 or 5 players. And then all of a sudden, through 5 or 6 of your national coaches, you're actually having success with 30 players
Mm-hmm.
at a high level in the country. So it was a little bit of an evolution, and I really loved the challenge of being the head of women's tennis. That's when we did achieve those results of the amount of players that we had inside the top 250. Particularly, had 4 players inside the top 100 at the time. And when I first started as head of women's tennis, we only had 1 player between 100 and 250. And within 3 years, we had 12 players between 100 and 250. And what that does is it's a safety net to make sure that there's some players that are going to drop out of the top 100,
Mm-hmm.
but equally we've got players that are going to go inside the top 100. So yeah, to have those type of numbers, it was incredibly, positive. I'm so proud of the team that I worked with, because you can't achieve those numbers without a fabulous team. So the collective group was able to achieve those type of results. And then through that involvement, during that time with coaches in particular, there was a need for more women coaches. We didn't have as many women coaches as we should have, in my opinion. So I kind of moved into specifically working with women in coaching, trying to increase the amount of women coaches, and that's what I had been doing for the last 3 to 4 years.
Tell me more about the woman coaching aspect, because it is mind blowing in my view that you have, let's say, even top 100 that can afford a coach, but you look at the list and you really only have, I don't know, a handful of coaches there. The work that you've done to increase that in Australia, but if you look overall, tennis has not been successful in that development. And I know that you're now in England, part of this inclusion program. But what is the bigger picture here on achieving that part of having more female coaches on tour, especially?
I feel like in a lot of ways, tennis is still operating in the dark ages, as in, and when I say this, it's stereotypically, it's one player works with one coach. That coach will travel 25 to 35 weeks on the tour, and then you're doing training weeks. I feel like that's just so limiting for a player and a coach. And if players can start to look at it differently, why wouldn't you want two or three different people involved? Yes, there needs to be a head coach or a leader coach. So when I talk about this as well, what happens is this creates opportunities for women coaches, because one of the greatest challenges I believe for women coaches is, again, the stages and life cycle is that generally you're going to have a family at some point in time. And it becomes virtually impossible to travel 25, 35 weeks on the road with a player if you're having a family. And equally, I think it's applicable to male coaches as well. And I'm not sure it's healthy for them to be doing that many weeks on the road. So yeah, I feel like if players can be more open to the diversity of thought, and as long as there's great communication, I feel like that would provide more opportunities for more women coaches. And probably the other part, for a long period of time, there was this, I would say it's like a 10 to 15 year era of players where they wanted to hit with their coach or slash hitting partner all the time.
Yeah.
And so therefore they were choosing, young males because they hit the ball well to be on tour with them. And these young males then became coaches on
Mm-hmm.
tour. And so those same opportunities were not afforded to women coaches because the women weren't really choosing to have the
Yeah.
women as hitting partners. They would only have them if they were coaches.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think there is a real opportunity now, and we're starting to see it more and more. Like, I think it's still happening, but it happened this past year. Kirsten Flipkens, for example, retired, amazing tennis mind, and she's assisting Mukaba
Mm-hmm.
with a head coach Mukaba works with.
Yeah.
You've got, Pam Schreiber, who works with Donna Vekic. She's not doing all of those weeks on the road with Donna. There's another coach. So I think what's going to happen over time is we're going to start to see more and more of these situations. But when these situations happen, it needs to have greater visibility.
Yes.
And so
Yeah.
that's something I think we really need to do a better job of.
That's a great point because also, I mean, unfortunately, you do see a lot of turnover in coaching that might actually help because coaching in tennis, it's a little bit different than majority of sports where in other sports you have your training or you have your game and then everyone goes home and also you have 10, 20, 30 players sort of that divides your attention. But in tennis, you are 24 hours, especially when you're traveling, that you are having breakfast, lunch, dinner, training. And if you can start dividing that part of it, that might be also more sustainable to everybody from the coach, but also the player, as you mentioned. Nicole, now you said that you had the greatest time when you were playing for Australia. And now you've had the opportunity to coach the Australian team. And also you look back and you also coached a lot of Australians. Is this part of your pride of being Australian that you're like, I want to impact Australian tennis, therefore I'm going to coach only Australians? Or is this something that naturally happened over and over just because of your success and you just went? Or was it something that personally like Australians, Aussie, 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 let's go?
Yeah, I think it was definitely a goal of mine to become BJK Cup coach, BJK Cup captain. So I've been fortunate enough to be in the role of BJK Cup coach for the last 10 years. And the nature was after finishing playing, I moved back to Australia. So I was based out of Melbourne and I have a family in Melbourne. So for me, it was, okay, well, I'm in Melbourne, so it's Australian tennis. In Australia, we don't have academies like in Europe or in America. So basically, if you want to work in high performance tennis, the only option it really is to work at Tennis Australia. And so, yeah, that's kind of what led me to that. And Tennis Australia is a fabulous organization and provides a lot of opportunity for coaches, but more so the continued development of you as a coach, as a person. And that's something that I've always made sure that I continue to do I'm a, I'm a lifelong learner. I don't know everything. There's a lot I don't know, but I try and upskill myself as much as possible. But equally, I've been doing that for the last 15 years too. And you could argue, or someone might say, oh, yeah, Nicole, you're just Australian tennis. You're pigeonholed to Australian tennis. I got to say that there is a part of me in the future that I do want to challenge myself to maybe work with someone from a different country. It'd be a different type of challenge. So yeah, I'm certainly maybe in the future open to look exploring, but for now, I'm definitely Aussie, Aussie, oi,
Was
oi, oi.
yeah, that's awesome. And now going into a little bit more of the future, not only as a person but as a sport. You've seen the sport as a player, you've seen the sport as a coach, you've seen the sport on the business side. What are the biggest challenges that you still see in tennis to take? Of course, you already mentioned female coachings and the diversification there, but if you look at a bigger picture, are there other barriers that I think the sport in itself has to evolve to today?
I feel like players need to engage more with the fans. I still think tennis is very closed off from, the outside. Players, don't get me wrong, there's a lot of pressure. There are many, many demands that people want from them. But the ways where we can bring the fans closer to the players, I think would grow the game. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, too, well, not just fans, but sponsors also want to see value. And whilst the sponsors' names are behind the court and the signage is there, what they really want is to be engaged with some of the best athletes in the world. So, yeah, I definitely see that as a gap. I feel like, maybe there's too many events for players, especially the top players. They are playing a lot if they're going deep in tournaments, and you run the risk of injury and burnout. So at times our tour is hard to follow. Like
Hmm.
everyone knows the four Grand Slams, but I'm not sure, especially on the women's tour, I'm not sure they fully realize where the rest of the tournaments sit. And then
Mhm.
you throw in the mix, Davis Cup, Billie Jean King Cup, and the Billie Jean King Cup format keeps changing all the time. So yeah, I feel like if you think about another sport like Formula One, everyone knows when it starts, they know how it works, the point system, and where the stops are on the calendar. And at the end, there's going to be the champion. You've got, basketball, baseball, NFL. It's a season, and
Yeah,
everyone follows the season. So our sports all year long.
yeah,
And I'm kind of thinking, well, is it a little bit too long?
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's hard to know when the season actually starts and when the season actually ends. And before we go into rapid fire questions here, you mentioned about other sports. Australia has a rich culture in sports, from the AFL to cricket to the record-breaking swimmers.
Mm.
Have you had the chance to interact with some of these other coaches just from a development perspective as well? Do you see a lot of similarities, differences? Have you learned things from other sports? What can you share here from this cross sports interaction that you may have had?
Yeah, I've learnt that if you're a head coach in any sport, there is a tremendous amount of pressure. And it's really, really important that coaches take care of themselves and really consider their own well-being, because they give so much to so many others. And the reason I know this is because probably the last few years I've actually been an AFL, that's Australian Football League, coach mentor. And during that process, I've actually been able to mix with quite a few different AFL coaches and learn from their experiences and the intensity of a season. And then equally, I've also kept in contact with the Australian Institute of Sport, and the Australian Institute of Sport provide coach development opportunities for coaches. And so then you have this mix of getting to know all these different, like coaches, Tracy Menders,
Hmm.
who was Ian Thorpe's coach.
Yeah,
And Ian Thorpe was, one of the most
yeah.
winning gold
Hmm.
medalists in Australian swimming history. And, it's just kind of hearing their journey. Everyone has struggles, and it's like, how did they evolve as coaches and why do they keep going? It's so inspiring, and we're very fortunate in Australia because we're so rich in sport history, in sports and different sports, that when I've had the opportunity to come across those world leading coaches, it's been, yeah, really, really tremendous experience.
Yeah, it's not always rainbows and butterflies out there. Let me ask you now, we went through just all parts of your life and everything that you've learned, and thanks for sharing a lot of your knowledge. What advice would you give to yourself, and how old would you be when you'll be receiving this advice?
I almost feel like I've had two lives. One life as a player where, I would say to myself, keep dreaming big, go for it. You know, the sky's the limit. And then I guess the second part of my life, it's probably a little bit cliche, but don't sweat the small stuff. You know,
Mm,
there's stuff that you think matters as a younger coach, but it really doesn't matter. And, you do need to keep the big picture in mind. Yeah, yeah, create and work on your softer skills. Being a tennis coach is not X and O's. Actually, what makes you the best coach is the softer skills, your emotional intelligence, your communication, your empathy, your care for players.
that's great. All right, we're heading into now our last, more or less 10 questions. This is our rapid fire, and these are first word thought that comes to your mind.
I'm
So
nervous, Yannick. I'm nervous.
that's what we strive for here. Uh, one word to describe yourself as a person.
Honest,
One word to describe yourself as a coach.
dedicated,
What are you most proud of in life?
having passion.
What are you most proud of in tennis?
Love it.
What's your current dream?
My kids to live their dreams.
What do you consider yourself an advocate for?
Women.
Do you have an athlete or coach you look up to?
Any athlete that is prepared to become the best version of themselves. You said one word. Sorry, that's way too
That's
much.
good. That's good. That's good. That's fine. First thing that comes. Do you have a favorite sport or team you keep up with?
I love March Madness basketball.
Oh, okay. Okay. Do you have a favorite book or podcast or anything that you would recommend people to read or listen?
I love Simon Sinek, and the book that comes to mind is Why.
And last but not least, is there a quote, philosophy, mantra that you like or you live by?
I'm stumped right now. Uh, I'm going to take a pass. I can't think of anything, Yannick.
That's fine. You can comment whenever that podcast comes out. You can write it, that mantra down there.
All
Uh,
right, perfect.
but well, Nicole, thank you so much for chatting with us today. Sorry for the technical difficulties. It's always so good hearing from you, and the passion, drive that empowers you, but empowers other people to keep doing what they're doing, and the why that we all do this. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Follow Nicole as she has taken on her home Grand Slam swing this couple next months. And follow the podcast here for more stories, and make sure you follow us on social media at Unboxed Sports. Thank you very much, Nicole, and see you next time.
Thank you. It's been fun. We'll see you down under.